I arrived 2 hours early. I've always been that kind of man. The one who shows up before the coffee's brewed and the chairs are straightened. Punctuality used to mean respect, back when people still believed in respect. The gravel road curved through the fields like an old scar, leading to what used to be my land, 60 acres of oak and grass, bought in 1981 with a down payment from a decade's worth of night shifts at the refinery. I slowed as the sign came into view. Johnson Family Reunion, Heritage Weekend. The lettering was new, shiny, printed on a banner stretched between two white poles. It looked corporate, the kind of thing the marketing team would design for a wellness retreat. They'd added balloons, too, gold and silver ones, fluttering against the July wind. When I reached the gate, a young man in a blue polo stepped forward, clipboard in hand. He couldn't have been more than 20. His name tag read, "Ele Volunteer Coordinator." "Good morning, sir. Welcome to the Johnson Family Reunion. Can I get your name, please?" His smile was professional, too wide to be genuine, but not rude either. I shifted the old thermos in my hand and answered, "Henry Johnson." He scanned the list, finger tracing the printed columns. Then again, then once more, slower this time. "HM. Could you spell that for me?" I did. He checked again, clicked his pen. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't see a Henry Johnson on the list." I laughed softly, thinking he was joking. Well, that's ironic, considering I'm the Johnson whose name's carved on the deed for this property. The boy blinked, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sure it's just an oversight. You can check in with the registration desk up there by the main tent." The main tent stood in the middle of what used to be my south field, a massive white structure, elegant and temporary, like a wedding pavilion. I parked beside a row of SUVs and shiny rental sedans. Someone had even hired a catering truck. I caught a whiff of grilled chicken and rosemary as I stepped out. The sun was high already, bleaching the grass pale. The old oak near the pond was still there, though someone had strung fairy lights around its trunk like it was a decoration, not a living thing that had weathered 100 storms. I walked slowly, taking it all in, the folding tables, the banners, the laughter. Familiar faces blurred by time. Cousins, nieces, nephews, all grown. They smiled vaguely when they recognized me. That polite smile you give someone you used to know, but hoped wouldn't come. At the registration table sat a woman I didn't recognize. Young, efficient looking, with a headset and a laptop. She tapped rapidly at the keys, eyes never leaving screen. "Name, please?" "Henry Johnson," I said again. "Father of Thomas Johnson, grandfather of Emma and Luke, owner of this land." That last part slipped out before I could stop it. Her fingers froze. "Owner," she repeated, blinking up at me. "Yes, ma'am, unless something's changed while I wasn't looking." She smiled awkwardly, the way people do when they think you might be confused. "I'm sure there's been some mix-up. The event coordinator, Mr. Thomas Johnson, said all attendees were pre-registered. You might want to speak to him directly." "I intend to." I turned toward the tents, where a group was gathered near the buffet line. My son was easy to spot. He always was. Broad shoulders, white golf shirt, posture of someone who's used to giving orders. Beside him stood Melissa, his wife. Pearls even in the middle of summer. Glass of white wine in hand. Laughing that deliberate laugh of hers. Around them, people clapped and called greetings. My son was shaking hands like a politician. For a moment, I stayed where I was, hidden by the shade of the oak, watching him. I remembered the boy who used to run barefoot across this same field, chasing fireflies with his sister. I remembered his small hand, gripping mine the day his mother died. And now I was standing on my own soil, apparently uninvited to my own family's reunion. I walked toward him anyway. "Thomas." He turned. For a fraction of a second. His smile faltered. Then it returned, practiced and bright. "Dad, you made it." Was I not supposed to? A flicker of unease crossed his face. "Of course you were, of course. It's just, we didn't expect you this early." The list. He gestured vaguely toward the registration tent. Yes, I said. The list that doesn't have my name on it. He laughed too loudly. Must be a clerical thing. Melissa handled the logistics. You know how these events are spreadsheets, email confirmations, all that. I looked around. The tables were set with printed menus. Johnson Legacy Luncheon, sponsored by Heritage Estates, LLC. Heritage Estates? I asked. Oh, that's just the company we use for planning, he said quickly. Makes it sound fancy. Sounds like something you'd put on a property brochure, I replied. He didn't answer. Melissa appeared at his side, a perfect hostess in linen and gold jewelry. Henry, she said smoothly, placing a hand on my arm as if to guide me away from the crowd. We weren't sure if you'd make it this year. With your health and all. My health is fine, I said, and I don't recall anyone asking. Her smile tightened. Well, we're so glad you're here. The reunion's really for the younger generation, introducing the kids to the family legacy, that sort of thing. We just didn't plan for the legacy itself to show up. I finished. Her eyes darted away. Somewhere behind us, someone clinked a glass for attention. A voice my sons called out, Everyone gather round. Let's celebrate our family's future. Applause rippled through the crowd. I stood among them, unseen in plain sight, as he raised his champagne flute and began a speech about new beginnings and shared heritage. And as he spoke, I felt it, the cold certainty that whatever this weekend was, it wasn't about family anymore. It was about ownership. And I was the only one left who remembered who actually owned what. That night I couldn't sleep. The reunion stretched on with music, bonfires, and speeches about our family's proud history. But by the time the paper lanterns floated over the pond, I was already back in my truck, parked half a mile down the road, staring at the glow from the tents through the windshield. I'd left quietly before dessert. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever does when an old man leaves a party early. They assume you're tired or confused or both. The truth was simpler. I didn't belong there anymore. I remember the day I bought that land, August 3rd, 1981. It was hotter than hell, and my hands are still stained with oil from the plant. The man at the bank shook my hand and said, Congratulations, Mr. Johnson. You're a landowner now. I'd smiled all the way home, imagining the house I'd build for Margaret and the children. Back then, the place was just a stretch of scrub and one leaning barn. But to us, it was freedom. For 40 years, I paid the taxes, mended the fences, planted the maples by the road. Every inch of that soil held something I'd built or buried. My wife's rose garden, my son's first bicycle, my daughter's dog under the elm tree. Then Margaret passed in 2014, and everything went sideways. Thomas came over a week after the funeral, suit still wrinkled from the service, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and nerves. He brought papers, said he wanted to help organize things. It's just for convenience, Dad, he told me, for tax reasons. If we transfer partial ownership, I could take care of the paperwork, make sure the land stays in the family. I hadn't read the fine print. I was tired, lonely, and too trusting of the son I'd raised. I signed what he gave me. He smiled, folded the documents carefully, and said, You'll thank me one day. And for a while I did. He took over property taxes, arranged maintenance, even replaced the roof on the old farmhouse. It felt like he was stepping up, being the man of the family, just like his mother always hoped. But slowly, his visits became shorter, his tone more professional. He began referring to the land as the property, not home. He brought developers once, said they were just assessing the boundaries. Then a surveyor, then a realtor friend who loved old lots with character. By the time I realized what was happening, they'd already built 2 goose houses near the south fence and rented them to tourists under the name Heritage Estates Country Stays. My land, my trees, my wife's rose garden, now a scenic picnic area. When I confronted him last year, he gave me that same patient smile people use for stubborn children. "Dad, you have to move with the times," he'd said. The place was falling apart. "We're preserving the legacy. You should be grateful." Grateful. That word has been following me like a fly ever since. He offered to build me a smaller place, a one-bedroom cottage with easy access, on another piece of land near town. Said it would be better suited to my age. But when I asked who would own it, he hesitated. That was all I needed to know. The dashboard clock said 11:43 p.m. when I finally turned the key. The headlights caught the old gate as I drove back home. My house sat quiet at the edge of the property. The one thing he hadn't touched yet. The air smelled of damp grass and with smoke from the reunion fires still burning in the distance. Inside, the kitchen light hummed softly. I poured myself a drink, bourbon, the cheap kind, and sat at the table surrounded by the silence Margaret used to fill. The same documents Thomas had given me years ago were still in the filing cabinet by the pantry. I pulled them out and spread them on the table. Property transfer agreement, joint title authorization, tax adjustment declaration, all signed by me, all legal. But as I read, something caught my eye. In the fine print under ownership transfer, there it was, partial conveyance of interest, not exclusive transfer, meaning I still own half the land, half the buildings, half the future he thought he'd inherited outright. I sat there for a long time, the bourbon warm in my chest, the paper trembling in my hand. They'd erased my name from the guest list, but not from the deed. The next morning, I drove into town. The county clerk's office was quiet, just a young woman behind the counter, tapping on her phone. I gave her the parcel number and asked for the most recent record. She clicked through the database, then printed something out. "There you go, Mr. Johnson. Still listed as co-owner. Henry L. Johnson and the late Margaret A. Johnson. Updated last in 2015. Her words were so ordinary that it took me a moment to absorb them. Still listed. Still mine. When I left the office, the air felt different. Lighter, sharper. I stopped by the diner for breakfast. The same one Margaret and I used to visit on Sundays. The waitress, Martha, brought me coffee without asking. "You headed to that big family thing they're throwing out by your place?" she asked, pouring. "Was there," I said. "Didn't stay." Didn't look like much of a family thing to me. More like a real estate convention. Heard they've been talking about building cabins for short-term rentals. I stirred my coffee slowly. "Is that so?" Martha shrugged. "Word gets around. Folks say your boy's turning it into some fancy vacation business. You must be proud." I smiled, though it felt more like a grimace. I suppose pride comes in many shapes. When I got back to the farmhouse, the first call came through. "Dad." Thomas's voice, brisk, irritated. "Where did you go last night? Everyone was asking about you." "Didn't want to spoil the view," I said. He sighed. "Listen, about that mix-up with the guest list. You can't take these things personally. Melissa just handled the registrations. It wasn't meant to be exclusionary." "Exclusionary," I repeated. "Good word, son. You learned that from your lawyer." Silence. Then carefully, "What do you mean?" "I mean the one who's been handling all your heritage estates paperwork." His voice tightened. "Dad, please don't start with conspiracy theories. We've got everything under control." "Yes," I said, leaning back in my chair. "That's what worries me." After the call, I went out to the porch and looked over the fields, the same stretch of earth where my wife's laughter once echoed, where my children built forts from hay bales and mud. I realized something then, something simple but heavy. They didn't want me gone because I was old. They wanted me gone because I was still in the way, still a name on the deed, still an obstacle to ownership. And that was the night I decided that if they wanted the land so badly, they'd have to learn what it means to fight for it, the way I once did. I didn't plan the confrontation. It came to me the way storms come in the country, slow at first, then all at once. For the next 3 days, I went about my routine as if nothing had changed. I mowed the yard, patched the fence, brewed coffee in the dented percolator Margaret loved. But every time I looked across the field and saw the tents still standing, the banners, the cars, the laughter, something inside me tightened. By Thursday morning, I'd had enough. They were holding what the banner called the Family Heritage Brunch and Presentation. There was music, catering, a photographer. I could see the crowd gathering from my porch. Women in floral dresses, men in linen shirts, children running barefoot through grass I'd planted myself 40 years ago. My son had rented a sound system. His voice carried clearly across the distance, through the speakers and over the wind. Today, we celebrate not just where we come from, he said, but where we're going. The Johnson family legacy is evolving. This land will continue to bring people together for generations through the Heritage Estates Foundation. Applause, laughter, the sound of champagne glasses clinking. Foundation. I almost laughed. The word had the same slick varnish as everything else he touched. I set down my mug, straightened my old jacket, and started walking. They didn't notice me until I was halfway across the field. The music faltered, then stopped altogether as I stepped into the open area near the tent. Conversations quieted. The caterer froze mid-pour. Someone's child whispered, "Who's that old man?" I saw Thomas at the microphone, standing on the small wooden platform they'd built, the same spot where I'd once taught him to hammer nails straight. His eyes widened when he saw me. Melissa, beside him, looked like she'd swallowed glass. "Dad," he said finally, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You came back. That's great. Everyone, this is my father, the man who started it all." There was polite applause, the kind you give a stranger. I walked closer, slowly, my boots crunching on the dry grass. "Started it all," I repeated. "That's one way to put it." Thomas lowered the microphone. "Maybe we should talk privately." "No," I said, my voice cutting clean through the quiet. "We'll talk here, since you seem to like public events." A ripple of discomfort spread through the crowd. Cameras turned away. Some guests drifted toward the buffet, pretending not to listen. I pointed at the banner above the stage. Heritage Estates Foundation, preserving the Johnson legacy. "I'd like to know," I said evenly, "what exactly this foundation is preserving." Thomas shifted. "Dad, it's just a formal structure, a business framework to manage the property." "The property?" I interrupted. "You mean my land? The same land you've been renting out to strangers under some fancy name." "Dad, please." He glanced nervously at the guests. "Let's not do this here." Melissa stepped forward, voice honeyed but trembling. "Henry, no one is taking anything from you. We just wanted to make the property self-sustaining. You said yourself the taxes were a burden." I looked her straight in the eye. "The taxes I paid, you mean, every year, out of the pension you pretend doesn't exist." Thomas took a deep breath, running a hand over his face. "You're misunderstanding the situation." "Am I?" I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. The paper crinkled as I pulled it free, the printout from the county clerk's office. "Because this document says otherwise." A hush fell over the tent. "This," I continued, holding it up, "is a current land record, and it shows the last recorded update in 2015. Owner, Henry L. Johnson and the late Margaret A. Johnson. Co-owners. No mention of Heritage Estates. No mention of Thomas Johnson." Someone gasped. I think it was my niece. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Dad." "No, son," I said quietly, but my voice carried. "You've spent the last few years trying to turn your mother's garden into a business, your childhood home into a brochure, and your father into a liability. You can cut me out of your guest list, your speeches, your photographs, but you can't cut me out of the deed." The silence that followed was absolute. For a long moment, Thomas just stood there, frozen between anger and embarrassment. Then, with the desperation of a cornered man, he turned to the crowd. "My father's been confused lately," he began, forcing a laugh. "He's not." I stepped closer. "Confused?" I repeated softly. "Do I look confused to you?" My voice was steady, and that steadiness frightened him more than shouting ever could. "You tried to take what wasn't yours," I said. "You built a business on lies and used my name to do it. And then you had the nerve to exclude me from my own land, from my own family." He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. So I turned to the guests, the cousins, the uncles, the family I'd fed, housed, and loved through decades of barbecues, funerals, and harvests. "You all know this place," I said. "You've eaten here, slept here, played here. You called it home. But before it was your vacation spot or photo backdrop, it was blood, sweat, and mortgage payments. And it was mine. Still is." The crowd shifted uneasily. "I'm not here to start a fight," I continued. "I'm here to end one." I took the folded envelope from my inside pocket and placed it on the edge of the stage, right in front of my son. "That," I said, "is a written notice from me as co-owner of this land, effective immediately. All business operations on this property are suspended. That includes your foundation, your rentals, and your events. You and your wife have 48 hours to vacate the structures you built without my consent." Melissa's hand flew to her mouth. Thomas went pale. "You can contact the county permits office if you have questions," I added. "But something tells me you won't like their answers." I turned to leave, the murmur of shocked voices rising behind me. As I passed the oak, I paused. Beneath its branches stood a girl, maybe 9 years old, hair braided neatly, holding a balloon string. She looked at me with curious eyes. "Are you Mr. Johnson?" she asked. "I am." She smiled shyly. "My mom said you planted this tree." I looked up at the rough bark, traced by decades of storms and summers. "That's right," I said softly, "and it's still standing." The wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of my son's shouting orders, of paper banners flapping and tearing loose. I kept walking until the noise faded and only the rustle of the grass remained. That evening, I sat on my porch again, watching the lights from the tents flicker out one by one. It should have felt like victory, but all I felt was tired. Margaret used to say every storm leaves something clean behind. A field, a sky, a heart. Maybe she was right, because for the first time in years, the land looked like itself again. No banners, no foundations, no lies. Just earth and silence. And beneath the quiet, something new. Not joy, not sadness, but peace. The morning after the confrontation, I woke before sunrise. The air smelled of dew and scorched grass. Remnants of the bonfire the younger ones had left smoldering. From my porch, the field stretched out in a blue haze of early light. My land, still mine. The silence was different now. Heavier, but clearer. I made coffee the old way, boiling water on the stove, pouring it through the dented metal filter Margaret used until the handle broke. The sound of it dripping was steady, measured, like thinking. By 7, my phone began to vibrate. Unknown number, then another, then Melissa's name, then Thomas's. I didn't answer. I sipped my coffee and waited. When the land is yours, you learn patience. By 10, a white Mercedes pulled up at the edge of my driveway. Thomas stepped out, his tie loosened, hair slicked back in that executive style he'd borrowed from business magazines. Melissa stayed in the passenger seat, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. He didn't bother with the greeting. "Dad," he said, jaw tight, "we need to talk." "I thought we did that yesterday," I replied, leaning against the porch railing. "You embarrassed me," he snapped, "in front of the entire family. You made it sound like I'm some kind of thief." I set down my mug. I didn't make it sound like anything. I stated a fact. He climbed the porch steps, voice rising. "You're blowing this out of proportion. The foundation isn't even profitable yet. We were trying to build something for the next generation." "For them?" I said quietly. Or for yourself? He hesitated, just long enough to answer the question without words. I worked for years to turn this place into something worthwhile, he said finally, his tone shifting to that measured, managerial calm he used in his sales calls. You've done your part, Dad. You build it. Let me take it from here. And erase me from it while you're at it? He sighed, like he was talking to a stubborn client. You're not thinking rationally. The property taxes alone are paid, I interrupted, on time, by me, every year. He blinked. Thomas, I said, leaning closer, you've mistaken kindness for ignorance. That's the mistake every thief makes. He flinched at the word thief. You think I don't know how this works? I've spent half my life signing contracts thicker than the Bible, back when paper actually meant something. You thought I wouldn't notice what you were doing. But you forgot one detail. You never owned this place. You borrowed it from me. Melissa called from the car, her voice sharp and brittle. Henry reacting, saying, the county's going to side with us. We've invested in this property. We made improvements. On stolen ground, I said. Her face tightened. Thomas took a step back. Dad, if you really push this, if you take to court, you'll destroy what's left of this family. I looked him straight in the eye. Son, you already did. At noon, I drove into town. My lawyer, Richard Clark, was an old friend from my refinery days, 2 years younger than me. Retired once already, but too restless to quit for good. His office was above the hardware store, the same one where I'd bought the nails for the barn roof in 1992. He looked up as I entered. Well, I'll be damned. Henry Johnson in a tie. That can only mean trouble. Something like that, I said, laying the envelope on his desk. I need your help making a few things official. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents. Land deed, co-ownership, unauthorized development, rental income. Jesus, your boy's been busy. Too busy, I said. Can we file an injunction to freeze their operations? He nodded. Already did something similar for a case last month. Shouldn't take long. You still have full co-ownership. They can't sell, rent, or even build the doghouse without your written consent. That's good, I said, but I don't want to stop there. Richard smiled faintly. I figured as much. What's the plan? I want the rentals shut down, the permits revoked, and every penny they've earned returned to the property count. He chuckled. You're not just reclaiming the land. You're repossessing their pride. I shrugged. They took enough of mine. He grew serious. Henry, this could get ugly. Family lawsuits always do. I'm aware. You sure you want to go through with it? I looked out the window. The same dusty street where I once parked my first pickup. The same sky that had watched me bury my wife. Yes, I said finally. It's time my son learned that love isn't the same as ownership. The paperwork took 3 days. By the end of the week, a courier delivered the official notice. Cease and desist. Unauthorized operations subject to civil penalty. Effective immediately. I pinned my copy to the fridge. The next morning, the phone calls started again. Angry this time. Dad, what the hell is this? Thomas shouted. You froze our business account. Do you know how many clients we had booked for summer? You can't just. I can, I said. And I did. He cursed under his breath. You'll ruin us. No, I said, come a stone. You ruined yourself when you forgot who gave you everything you have. There was a long silence, just the sound of his breath through clenched teeth. Then he hung up. 2 days later, a letter arrived by courier. Notice of mediation request. Heritage Estates, LLC versus Henry L. Johnson. I laughed when I saw the return address. The same law firm that had once helped me finalize the mortgage on this land 40 years ago. I called Richard. Let them file, he said. They'll lose before the ink dries. The records are all in your favor. And if they push harder, we'll countersue for damages and unpaid royalties. Good, I said. Let's push harder. Sunday morning, I walked the boundary line of the property for the first time in years. The grass was high, the air sweet with clover. The cabins they'd built looked quiet now, windows dark, doors padlocked by court order. I passed the garden where Margaret's roses still bloomed, even after all these years. I knelt to pull a weed from between the stems. The soil was soft, black, alive. She would have hated all this conflict, I thought. She'd tell me to forgive, to be the bigger man. But even forgiveness needs truth to grow. I stood, brushing dirt from my hands, and looked across the land. The wind rippled through the fields, bending the tall grass like waves. I remembered something my father told me once back when I was Thomas's age. Land remembers who takes care of it, son, and it never forgets who tries to steal it. He'd been right. The land remembers. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Richard's call notes spread before me. Filings, court dates, statements of ownership. Each line of type felt like a heartbeat returning. The farmhouse was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of an engine. Thomas's car, slowing near the gate, then stopping. Headlights swept across the window. I didn't move. The engine idled for a long time. Then it turned off. Footsteps on the gravel. A pause. Finally, the sound of retreat. I exhaled slowly and closed the file. Let him think. Let him stew. Let him remember that this land, every inch, every root, every stone, has a longer memory than any man's ambition. The next morning, the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Thomas. It was the county assessor. Mr. Johnson, we received notice that you reclaimed full ownership of Parcel 24B, the woman said. Congratulations. Not many folks get to keep what's rightfully theirs these days. I smiled, looking out the window as the sun rose over my fields. No, I said quietly. Not many do. And for the first time in a long while, the morning light didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. The reckoning came quietly, not like thunder, but like frost creeping over glass. Slow, delicate, and absolute. By mid-August, the whole town knew. You can't file a property injunction in a small county without it spreading faster than wildfire. Every cafe, every barbershop, every church pew whispered the same story. Old man Johnson took his land back. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, my son had bragged about his family values while I kept quiet. But people have long memories here. They remember who poured the foundation for the barn in '83. They remember who fixed their fences after storms. They remember who didn't. The paper trail was simple enough, public record, stamped and filed. But the humiliation? That was personal. 2 weeks after the injunction, the county board scheduled a public mediation meeting to resolve the matter. Richard insisted I attend. Best to let him hang himself with his own rope, he said, tapping his pen against the folder. And don't worry, I'll be right beside you. The meeting was held at the old courthouse on Main Street. Wooden benches, fans turning lazily overhead. The kind of place where justice still smelled faintly of dust and coffee. When I arrived, the hall was already full. Not just lawyers and officials, neighbors, cousins, even a few of the same relatives who'd clapped for Thomas's speech weeks earlier. Curiosity fills seats faster than loyalty ever did. Thomas stood near the front, pale but polished. Melissa was beside him in a tailored suit, her expression carved from porcelain. Their lawyer, a young man in a navy suit, flipped through papers with visible confidence. The arrogance of someone who'd never lost anything that mattered. When he saw me enter, Thomas's jaw tightened. He didn't offer a greeting. The clerk called the room to order. Case number 47B, Heritage Estates, LLC versus Henry L. Johnson. Matter: ownership dispute, unauthorized property use, financial damages. Richard leaned toward me, murmuring, "Let him speak first." Their lawyer stood, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, my clients have invested considerable resources developing the land in question. Mr. Johnson Sr. granted his son partial ownership years ago. Co-ownership, Richard interrupted. Not partial. Co-ownership. There's a legal difference. The judge raised a hand. We'll review that shortly. The young attorney continued, though his tone faltered. Regardless, Mr. Johnson Sr.'s recent interference has caused significant losses. Losses from illegal rentals, Richard said dryly. Thomas shot him a glare. The judge sighed. Mr. Clark, please. You'll have your turn. When it came, Richard didn't rush. He stood slowly, adjusting his glasses, and placed a single folder on the table. Your Honor, everything you need is in here. Tax receipts, bank transfers, the original deed, and the county's own record confirming my client's ownership. My client never relinquished his rights. His son and daughter-in-law constructed and operated rental structures on his property without consent. They profited for nearly 3 years before attempting to transfer full ownership via a fraudulent foundation. He let that word fraudulent hang in the air. The judge leafed through the papers, brow furrowed. Everything appears valid, she murmured. Mr. Johnson, Jr., did you have your father's written authorization for these developments? Thomas hesitated. It was verbal. Richard smiled slightly. Convenient, but not legal. The judge turned another page, eyes narrowing. Mr. Johnson, I see here that you registered Heritage Estates, LLC, using the property address, listing yourself as sole manager. Your father's name does not appear anywhere. Is that correct? Thomas's voice cracked. Yes. But that's just how the lawyer drafted it. Your lawyer? She asked, glancing up. The same one sitting beside you now. He shifted in his seat. Melissa whispered something in his ear, too quiet to catch. The judge closed the folder and leaned back. I've seen enough. Silence spread across the room like a cold wind. It is the finding of this court that the land at issue remains under the ownership of Henry L. Johnson and the late Margaret A. Johnson. All structures built without his written consent are to be considered unauthorized and subject to removal. Any profits derived from said operations are to be forfeited and returned to Mr. Johnson. Furthermore, all titles, permits, and licenses issued under Heritage Estates, LLC are hereby revoked effective immediately. She rapped her gavel once. Case closed. The sound echoed like thunder. Outside, the summer heat hit like a slap. Reporters were waiting. Not many, just a couple from a local paper. One of them called out, Mr. Johnson, any comment on your victory? I just said, I didn't win anything. I just kept what was already mine. Behind me, Thomas stormed down the courthouse steps, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief. Melissa trailed after him, sunglasses back in place like armor. He stopped when he saw me by my truck. Are you proud of yourself? He hissed. You humiliated your own family. No, son, I said quietly. You did that when you forgot what family means. He stepped closer, eyes wet, voice trembling between anger and something smaller. Shame, maybe. You've destroyed everything I built. I looked at him for a long moment. You build it on lies, Thomas. Anything built that way collapses eventually. I just gave a push. He turned away, muttering something I didn't catch. Melissa pulled his arm, and they walked to their car, heads down. The Mercedes sped off, leaving a swirl of dust in its wake. That evening, I drove home by the back road, the long way past the old mill, where the sun sets low across the wheat fields. When I reached the house, the sky was burning gold and violet, the way Margaret used to love. The property felt lighter. The cabins were empty now, locks broken, furniture gone. The air smelled like clean earth and cedar. I walked to the oak tree by the pond and sat beneath it. The bark was cool under my palm. The lake reflected the dying light, rippling softly. I thought about my son, about all the years between the boy I'd raised and the man he'd become. I didn't hate him. Not even after everything. Hate's too heavy to carry for long. But I wasn't going to let him take my home. Not again, not ever. The crickets started their evening song. I could almost hear Margaret's voice in the breeze. You did what you had to, Henry. I smiled faintly. Yeah, I whispered, but it sure took me long enough. The first stars came out small and bright. I leaned back against the oak and watched them appear one by one, until the sky turned black and the land was silver again. This land, my land, had seen my sweat, my love, my loss. It had seen betrayal and forgiveness, and now justice. They'd taken my name off a list, but not off the soil, and in the end, that was enough. The last thing I remember before falling asleep under that tree was the sound of the wind moving through the fields, soft, patient, steady, like the land itself was breathing again. And it whispered, almost kindly, "Welcome home, Henry." It's been 6 months since that day in court. Winter came early this year. A thin frost on the porch railings, fog in the mornings, the kind that softens everything and hides the scars of summer. The land sleeps under a silver blanket now, quiet, content. It feels at peace. I've settled into a rhythm again. The house no longer feels hollow. I repaired the window latches, oiled the old piano Margaret used to play on Sundays, and patched the roof by hand. My joints complain, but I don't. There's something holy about fixing what still can be fixed. The cabins are gone. County ordinance ordered them dismantled after the ruling. I watched from the porch as workers took them apart board by board, loading the panels into trucks marked Heritage Estates, LLC. The sign came down last. For a brief moment, I thought Thomas might come by to help, or at least to apologize. But he didn't. The only trace of him came in January, a registered letter with a typed message inside. "Dad, I hope you're happy. You've ruined any chance I had to make something of this family name. Don't expect to hear from us again. Thomas, no love, no your son. Just ink on paper." I burned the letter in the fireplace that night, watched it curl, blacken, and vanish. Margaret used to say some words aren't worth keeping. I finally understood what she meant. Word around town is that Thomas and Melissa moved to Denver. Someone told me he's working at a property firm, still talking about development, still chasing legacy in square footage and marble countertops. I don't wish him ill. I just hope one day he learns that legacy isn't about ownership. It's about stewardship. Sometimes when I sit by the window in the evenings, I imagine him as a boy again, muddy sneakers, laughter echoing through these same fields, chasing a kite that always pulled just out of reach. I wonder when that boy disappeared. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he just got lost along the way. In February, a letter arrived from the county registrar confirming the final transfer. Full ownership of parcel 24 be restored to Henry L. Johnson. Just paper, maybe. But when I unfolded it, it felt heavier than it should have, like a medal earned through patience, not battle. I framed it, hung it beside Margaret's photograph in the hallway. She's smiling in that picture, taken the summer before she died. The light in her eyes looks a lot like the sunlight that comes through the window now. Sometimes I talk to her, not out loud, not anymore, but quietly, the way old men pray. I tell her about the mornings, how the frost melts off the fields by 9, how the deer come down from the ridge to drink at the pond again, how the oak tree's roots have cracked the soil near its base, strong enough to break stone. And I tell her how the silence doesn't hurt as much anymore. Last week, Emma, my granddaughter, called. The first time in months. Her voice sounded uncertain, shy, but warm. "Grandpa," she said, "I found an old photo of you and Dad. You're standing by the barn, holding a hammer. I think I was maybe 5. You were helping him build something." I smiled. "Yeah, we built a fence that summer." "I remember," she said softly. "He used to tell me that was the year he learned what hard work meant." I hesitated. "Does he still say that?" "No," she whispered, "but I think he remembers." She paused and added, "Can I come visit next weekend?" And just like that, The air in the room changed, lighter, fuller. "Of course," I said. "Bring boots. The ground's muddy this time of year." Today, I stood out by the pond, watching the reflection of the oak ripple in the water. The wind was sharp, carrying the faint smell of rain and wood smoke. Somewhere far off, a train horn echoed, low, mournful, steady. I thought about how everything changes and how some things don't. They took my name off a list once, erased me like I was a mistake in their plans. But the land never forgot me. The soil held my footprints. The oak kept my initials carved in its bark. The house still creaked in the same familiar places when the wind blew east. And now, when I walk these fields, I don't think of loss anymore. I think of continuity. The land remembers who listens. Emma arrived yesterday, her car bumping down the gravel road just like mine used to. She brought groceries, a thermos of soup, and a photo album she'd made herself. We sat on the porch as the sun went down, flipping through pictures. Margaret in her garden, Thomas as a boy with a fishing rod, Emma herself as a toddler wrapped in a blanket. When we reached the last page, she pointed at an empty spot and said, "This one's for today." Then she smiled and took a picture of me sitting under the oak, coffee in hand. The house glowing behind me. The click of the camera was soft but final, like the closing of a book. Now it's night again. The fields are silver in the moonlight, the wind calm. Somewhere in the dark, an owl calls, low and certain. I can smell the earth through the open window, damp and alive. The world moves on. So do people. So do families. But some things, some truths, stay where you left them, waiting for you to come home and claim them again. And maybe that's what legacy really means. Not what you leave behind, but what refuses to leave you. As I turn off the lamp and the room fades into shadow, I say one last thing. Half to the land, half to the woman who made it home. They crossed my name off the guest list, Mag, but it's carved on the deed and in the dirt. And that's one list no one can erase. Then I smile, because for the first time in years, I can say it without bitterness. Only peace. The land is mine, and at long last, I am its again.